When I was 7 years old, I was terrified of the dark. Almost every night I would wake up hearing whispers that sounded like different people talking quietly. They were not evil, just unfamiliar, and that made them even scarier. My mother thought they were nothing more than normal childhood fears and bumps in the night, but I tried many times to explain that the voices were distinct, the way real people sound different from one another. On some nights the whispers frightened me so much that I would crawl into bed with her. Her room was on the second floor, and the hallway outside her door looked straight down the stairs into the living room below. The bathroom was right there too, which made it convenient for middle-of-the-night trips. One night, close to Christmas, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, I clearly heard a voice say, "Look!" At the very bottom of the stairs, a bright red spotlight appeared on the wall with no visible source. Being so close to Christmas, my young mind instantly decided this had to be Santa checking on me. Excited, I started walking down the stairs. After the second step, the red light began to drift away into the darkness of the living room, so I picked up my pace. That was when a strong, masculine voice, very different from my father's, spoke firmly. "Stop, right now. Go back up those stairs." I obeyed immediately and turned around. The moment I reached the top, I heard a tremendous crash from downstairs. I ran straight back to my mother's bed, dove under the covers, and stayed there the rest of the night. The next morning, we discovered the poinsettia lights that had been wrapped around the stair railing were ripped down and piled at the bottom, some of them broken as if torn with great force. In the living room, the heavy dry sink had been pulled off the wall and thrown to the floor. My mother was stunned, my father worried we had been broken into, and my sister was in tears. Nothing was missing. There were no signs of forced entry or any intruder. Then I noticed something that left me too terrified to speak. On the edge of the wooden dry sink were 3 deep indentations where the finish had been gouged away, as if something had grabbed it with powerful force and hurled it down. After that night, the whispers never returned. I never heard another voice again. I am 20 years old now, and I am still afraid of the dark, especially shadowy stairwells. I have never been able to find a satisfying explanation for what happened, but whatever was at the bottom of those stairs that night was real enough to physically move objects in our house. Part of me wonders if the masculine voice that stopped me was protecting me, and in some strange way, I wish I could thank it. In Taiwan, a man named Keith was staying at a camp in a rural area, just outside a small town, with some friends. One day he went into town alone for lunch, and unexpectedly ran into an old friend from his youth named Don. At first, Keith was happy to see him, and they sat down to eat together, but a deep sense of unease soon began to grow. Halfway through the meal, the feeling became overwhelming when Keith suddenly realized the truth. Don had been dead since they were in middle school. He tried to stay calm and look for a way to leave without causing a scene. Don offered to pay and pulled out some strange money Keith had never seen before. Keith thanked him quickly and tried to go, but Don insisted they catch up more and suggested they head down to the river to do some fishing. By now, Keith was convinced he was dealing with something unnatural and firmly declined. Don grew more agitated, but Keith finally made an excuse and started jogging away. As he left, Don called after him in a calm but unsettling voice, "All right, I guess you got one on me, but you owe me now." Keith hurried through the town feeling completely disoriented, the streets no longer looking familiar. Eventually he turned a corner onto a road he recognized and made it back to camp. He told his friends what had happened and asked them about the restaurant where he had eaten. Neither the restaurant nor the street it was supposedly on existed. 3 months later, a terrible tragedy struck. Keith's younger brother was out with friends when he suddenly started acting strangely. Despite not knowing how to swim, he walked straight out into a river. In waist-deep water, he disappeared beneath the surface. His friends rushed in to help, but found him strangely stuck underwater. They could not pull him out until after he had already drowned. The river where his brother died was the exact same one where Dawn had wanted to take Keith fishing that day. Back in 1992, my girlfriend and I flew into her hometown a few days early for Thanksgiving. We decided not to tell any family members on either side so we could surprise them later. There were no cell phones back then, so no one had any way of knowing we had arrived. We landed late at night and checked into a nice extended stay hotel with a kitchenette, couch, king bed, and doors that opened directly onto the parking lot. I fell asleep almost immediately while she took a shower. She told me later that she lay awake until around 2 in the morning. As she finally turned over to sleep, she noticed a quick flash through the slightly open blinds of the smaller window. She assumed it was just a street light in the parking lot and drifted off. Around 5 o'clock, I woke up to loud, persistent knocking on the sliding glass door beside the bed. She woke up moments later, equally confused. The knocking continued without pause, moving from the sliding door to the front door and back again. It was forceful and determined. Not quite a police knock, but clearly someone who expected to be let in. I looked through the peephole and saw no one. When the knocking returned to the sliding door, I stood there listening. No voices, no names being called. Nothing to suggest a drunk guest who had simply gone to the wrong room. I pulled the curtain back just enough to peer outside, pressing my face close to the glass because I was practically blind without my contacts. Still nothing. The instant I let the blinds fall shut, the knocking started again. By now we were both thoroughly unnerved. Nobody knew we were in town, let alone at this hotel. The only person who had any idea was the older man who had checked us in. Worried for our safety, I called the front desk while the knocking continued. The man who answered sounded concerned and said he would send the security guard right over. The knocking went on for another minute or so, then stopped. A couple of minutes later, the front desk called back. Security had found no one outside and no signs of disturbance. We stayed awake until daylight, too rattled to fall back asleep. Later that day, when we stepped outside, we noticed a single footprint in the dirt leading away from the sliding glass door. The hotel was in a good part of town, a place she had grown up in and always felt safe. That single print and the memory of those relentless knocks left us both deeply unsettled for a long time. To this day, we still have no idea who was out there or what they wanted. My brother once rented a flat in an old, run-down house in downtown Matt Clemens, Michigan. The town had been a popular spot for baths during the Depression era, and this particular building had apparently been a brothel back in its heyday. The house was large and ragged, divided into several odd apartments. From the beginning, he noticed strange little things: cupboard doors opening on their own, objects disappearing and reappearing, and most peculiar of all, his boxers and underwear vanishing from his drawer. He used to joke that the ghost had a crush on him. The activity was never violent or threatening, just consistently odd. After he started dating the woman who would later become his ex-wife, the strange occurrences began to increase. She started staying over more often, and new things started happening. In the mornings, she would find her shoes, which she always left neatly on a mat inside the apartment, placed outside on the patio. She would tease my brother about moving them, but he kept quiet about his suspicions so he wouldn't scare her. Then the stove burner started turning on by itself. She would walk into the kitchen, find it lit, turn it off, and a short while later, it would be burning again. One night, my brother woke up and saw his girlfriend sitting at the end of the bed, staring at him. He could even feel her presence near his feet. He called out for her to come back to bed, but she didn't respond. When he spoke louder and asked what was wrong, her actual voice answered from right beside him in bed. He turned and saw her lying next to him, sound asleep. The figure at the foot of the bed had vanished. A few nights later, they were both sleeping when he woke to her screaming. She was thrashing violently in bed, clutching at her neck as if someone was strangling her. He shook her awake. She came out of it crying and terrified, telling him she had dreamed of a jealous woman who was choking her and demanding she leave her man alone. When she calmed down, they noticed red marks on her neck. My brother finally told her everything he had been experiencing. They did some research on the building and confirmed its history as an old brothel where wealthy visitors once stayed. He continued living there for a few more weeks until he found a new place. But his girlfriend refused to spend another night. The activity never turned truly violent toward him, but the whole experience left them both shaken. I know my brother well enough to tell when he is telling the truth, and his girlfriend looked genuinely haunted whenever she spoke about that night. It was pretty messed up. A few months after suffering a stroke, my grandmother moved into a nursing home for rehab. Although one side of her body is partially paralyzed, and she has grown weaker from limited activity, her mind remains completely sharp. Early one Sunday morning, just as we were preparing to visit her as usual, we received a call from the family of her longtime best friend. The friend had moved to Florida about 10 years earlier, and they had slowly lost touch except for occasional Christmas cards. She had passed away very early that same morning. When we arrived at the nursing home, we were the first visitors of the day. We signed in and headed straight to her room. She keeps a little visitor book so we can see who has stopped by. No one had signed it since Saturday morning. As soon as we walked in, she greeted us cheerfully and said, "Oh my, so many visitors this morning." When we asked what she meant, she told us her dear old friend from Florida had come to see her. The friend had said she was going away for a while, not to worry, that she would be watching over her, and that they would see each other again someday. My grandmother also mentioned how healthy and vibrant she had looked. A chill ran down my spine, like I had never felt before. Later, I quietly asked the staff if anyone had been in her room that morning. They confirmed she had had no visitors. There had also been no phone calls for her, and their logs showed nothing. That same morning, I called the friend's family to offer condolences and asked, under the pretense of helping notify others, if they had reached out to anyone else locally. They told me we were the only ones they had contacted in the area. They had no idea my grandmother was even in a nursing home, since they assumed she still lived with us. I know it is possible she simply had a vivid dream, but the timing, the specific message, and the fact that her friend had passed only hours earlier make it feel like far more than coincidence. It still gives me chills every time I think about it. One Saturday night, my buddy Matt, who had served in the Air Force, told us a story from his time running night security patrols on a base in Kansas. He and his squad mate, Craig, would spend their shifts driving around the perimeter in a Humvee. Abandoned houses from the Dust Bowl era dotted the plains, so seeing one was nothing unusual. But on this particular night, Craig was feeling adventurous and wanted to check one out. Matt had a deep, uneasy feeling in his stomach from the moment they spotted the old house standing alone in the fields, but he pushed it aside and went along. They parked about 30 meters away and approached on foot under moonlight. The closer they got, the worse Matt's gut feeling became. The porch creaked as they stepped up and knocked. When no one answered, they went inside. The house was strangely intact, as if the family had simply walked out one day and never returned. The table was still set for a meal. Matt felt so uneasy that he raised his rifle and began clearing the rooms tactically. Craig suggested they go upstairs, and Matt took the lead. As they climbed, the air grew noticeably colder despite the hot August night. In the first bedroom, Matt saw two small beds with clothes neatly laid out, as if ready for school the next morning. That was the moment he wanted to leave immediately. Craig was still curious and wanted to keep exploring. As they headed back down, Craig noticed the basement door slightly ajar. His eyes lit up with excitement. Matt refused to go first this time and told Craig to take point. Craig opened the door, flashlight on and weapon shouldered, and started down the stairs with Matt close behind. When Craig reached the bottom and turned the corner, he stopped dead in his tracks. Matt, still on the stairs, asked what was down there. Craig didn't answer. When Matt looked at him, Craig's face had gone completely white with a 1,000-yard stare. Without a word, Craig shoved past Matt, walked straight out of the house, and climbed back into the Humvee. Matt followed without looking around that corner. For the rest of their shift, Craig never spoke a single word, no matter how many times Matt asked what he had seen. To this day, Craig still refuses to talk about it. Whenever the topic comes up, he turns pale and goes quiet with that same distant look on his face. Whatever was in that basement remains a secret only he knows. About 10 years ago, my brother and his friends had a garage band that played Spanish rock and alternative music. They practiced in the basement of our 1904 wood frame house every Sunday afternoon, usually wrapping up around 8 in the evening. I worked the graveyard shift, so I would typically get home right as they were finishing. This particular evening in late fall, they decided after a long session to head over to another friend's house. Everyone filed out through the long basement route, up the back stairs, through the kitchen and living room, and out to the front porch, where they loaded the equipment into my brother's truck. My brother handed his keys to a buddy and stayed behind for a moment because he had forgotten his pancakes in a to-go container on one of the speakers downstairs. The basement was cluttered with partitions and the big boiler sitting right in the middle, so sightlines were limited. As he reached for the container, he caught a shadowy figure moving in his peripheral vision. A heavy wave of dread washed over him. We had grown up learning that if you sensed a bad presence, you should say a quick prayer or tell it off. He chose the latter, muttering, "Hey, fuck you. I don't have time for this shit." He walked briskly to the back of the basement and up the stairs, closing doors and turning off lights as he went. The final switch was on the far side of the living room near the front door. The door was already open, letting in the amber glow from the street lamp. He felt something right at his back, but refused to turn around. The moment he flipped the last light, the whole house went dark. He stepped outside, pulled the door shut behind him, still holding his food container, and jogged down the porch steps toward the truck parked in front of the house. As he climbed into the driver's seat, buckled up, and prepared to pull away, one of his friends asked, "Hey, wait, what about your brother? Isn't he coming with us?" My brother laughed and replied that I had already left early for work and my car wasn't even there. Then came the question that stopped him cold. "So then, who was walking right behind you when you were leaving the house?" He had been completely alone. One night, during my junior year of college, I came back to my dorm room around midnight, after spending hours chatting online. The dorm had a well-known reputation for being haunted, especially the second and fifth floors, and my room was on the fifth. I lived on the international floor with a roommate from Tokyo, and we shared a bathroom suite with a suite mate from Cairo. It was a fun group overall. When I walked in, my roommate had the curtain pulled between our sides of the room. She sounded relieved to hear me and immediately told me that while she had been in the bathroom, the door had opened by itself. I am usually pretty skeptical and practical about these things, so I went in to check. The curtain over the bathroom window was closed, but when I peeked underneath, I saw the window was open about an inch. I figured it had just been a draft and told her so. She seemed greatly relieved. About 20 seconds had passed. I turned around and went back into the bathroom to take out my contacts and brush my teeth. The moment I stepped inside, I stopped cold. The curtain, which had definitely been closed just moments before, was now rolled up neatly on both sides, exactly the way someone would do if they had been sitting on the windowsill looking out. It was not simply pushed aside. It looked deliberately arranged. I stood there staring at it for a good 30 seconds. Then I turned off the light, walked back into the room, and went straight to bed without mentioning it. The next morning, it took me several minutes to unroll each side of the curtain and flatten it out so it would hang properly again.